Maria Antonia of Austria. The girl assembled from the same genes, just in different combinations. If the court physicians of the Habsburgs had understood that genes love variety, perhaps Maria Antonia would not have been born with a face that looked like it came from a textbook called How Not to Crossbreed Your Relatives. But unfortunately, instead of genetic compatibility, her ancestors preferred the formula brother plus niece equals queen. And so, in the year 1669, as a result of an experiment known as What Happens If You Keep Marrying Your Cousins, Maria Antonia of Austria was born. She had only 6 unique great-grandparents. For reference, a normal person has 16. The rest were repeats, repetitions of repetitions, and the blood-soaked echo of dynastic madness. Her face featured that legendary Habsburg jaw, the family's noble badge of degeneration. A straight bite? Forget it. Harmonious features? Only in the family crest. A strong lower jaw, narrow eyes, heavy eyelids, and a nearly permanent expression that said, I know my family tree is a maze. Politically, of course, she was pushed along the usual track. She was married off to her cousin naturally, another Habsburg, to close yet another genetic loop. She gave birth to a son and, shall we say, thankfully had no time for more. She died at the age of 23, leaving behind one more brick in the wall of Habsburg decay. So remember, Maria Antonia was not just an unlucky girl from an imperial house. She was a genetic warning wrapped in velvet and pearls. Her life was a monument to the obsessive pursuit of pure blood, carved into facial features that practically screamed, "Stop marrying your aunts." Margarita Teresa of Spain, the princess with a head of grandeur and a body of genetic curse. If you've ever admired the paintings of Diego Velázquez, especially his famous Las Meninas series, and thought, oh, what a charming little infanta with an angelic face, then it's time to learn the truth. Because beneath the lace, pearls, and Baroque lighting hid a girl assembled from dynastic horror, like a porcelain doll made from a single genetic mold. Margarita Teresa of Spain, born in the year 1651, was the daughter of an uncle and his niece, and simultaneously the granddaughter and great-granddaughter of the same people. That's not exaggeration. That's Habsburg reality, baby. At their family dinners, you didn't need name cards, just mirrors. What stands out in her portraits? A head, massive, regal, as if sculpted to carry a crown and a body straight from a younger sibling's wardrobe. Velázquez did what he could. Angles, shadows, pleats. But even he couldn't hide the fact that Margarita suffered from severe disproportions, possibly reverse microcephaly or a hormonal growth disorder. And here's the bonus. She was married off to her cousin uncle to lock in the genetic success. Margarita lived only 22 years. In that time, she gave birth to 4 children, all of whom died in infancy. Because when you spin the genetic roulette wheel using the same handful of numbers for generations, you don't win, you go bust. Margarita Teresa is not just a sweet little infanta in a museum frame. She is an icon of dynastic decay, embalmed in oil paint. And if history teaches us anything, it's this. Greatness without genetic diversity is a fast track to a throne built on crutches. Anne of Austria, not a queen of beauty, but a caricature of imperial genetics. In school textbooks, Anne of Austria is painted as a stately queen, the mother of the great Louis XIV, French by crown, Habsburg by blood. But now the truth you won't see in a television series about the Musketeers. Anne was born in 1601, and even then her genes were like a stale cocktail of repeats. The Habsburgs had married each other so many times. The family became a genetic spiral curled in on itself. There was barely any room left for anything new, not in the DNA and certainly not in the faces. Portrait artists tried their best to soften her image, but contemporaries were far less polite. Her face was gloomy, her features described as tired, and her figure crooked. She walked with a twisted posture and suffered from scoliosis, a queen of France with the spine of a cloistered nun. Her health was a mixed bag of mystery and misery. She was constantly ill, and no one quite knew what was wrong. With every new episode, the doctor shrugged and offered either bloodletting or prayer. Neither worked. Louis XIII saw her less as a woman, more as a political necessity, and frankly, who could blame him? But her victory was Louis XIV, the son king of France. Ever wonder why he was so impulsive, vain, and tyrannical? A genetic gift straight from mom, with her crooked back and shattered bloodline. Anne of Austria wasn't a heroine of love or power. She was a living reminder that empires built on cousin blood smell not of nobility, but of rot. Infanta Maria Anna of Spain, the bride with a jaw too big to hide under a veil. If you think royal marriages are all about love, roses, and serenades from balconies, welcome to the brutal reality of 17th century Spain. There, a bridal veil was less a symbol of romance and more a decorative curtain for genetic disasters. And our leading lady? Infanta Maria Ana of Spain, who lived from 1606 to 1646, the child of two branches of the Habsburgs tied together tighter than a noose. Maria Anna wasn't just born a Habsburg. She was a Habsburg cubed on her father's side, on her mother's side, and on every side in between. The same faces, the same chins, over and over again. Most importantly, she bore the infamous Habsburg jaw, the kind you couldn't hide, not in the shadows, not in profile. Contemporary accounts described her appearance as unpleasant and heavy, her face long and angular, and her expression permanently tired, as if she was born into an arranged marriage on day one. And with this winning hand, she was married off to Ferdinand III, and who was he? You guessed it, another Habsburg. Because really, what could be more romantic than marrying someone who's genetically identical to you, like a reflection in a foggy mirror? Why this marriage? Of course, to reinforce the alliance between Austria and Spain. As for heirs, no worries. Someone had to inherit that architectural chin and a face that looked sculpted without a compass. Maria Anna isn't the story of a princess walking down the aisle. She's a living illustration of how far blood, purity, mania can go far enough that the faces of descendants start to resemble caricatures of their own ancestors' portraits. Maria Laura of Belgium, great-granddaughter of a colonial nightmare with a genetic surprise. When people talk about the Belgian monarchy, they usually think of diamonds, chocolate, neutrality, and maybe, just maybe, the African carnage orchestrated by King Leopold II. But almost no one mentions that dynastic purity, so beloved by Europe's royal houses, left behind more than just moral scars. Meet Maria Laura of Belgium. She lived from 1928 to 2005, and every one of those years was lived under the crushing weight of her family tree. Her parents weren't just related, they were first cousins. Because, as is often the royal custom, why search for love when you can just search the nearest branch of the family? From birth, Maria Laura was a reminder that bloodlines aren't to be toyed with. A curved spine, poor eyesight, and later distinct craniofacial abnormalities. Contemporaries noted, her face was long, her features asymmetrical, her gaze tired. The palace tried to keep her out of the spotlight, but in aristocratic circles, whispers spread louder than headlines. But no, this wasn't a curse. It was genetic accounting. Leopold II didn't just sow misery in Congo, he was setting up a time bomb in his own house, mixing branches, ignoring consequences, and swapping legacy for lineage. Maria Laura wasn't a victim. She was a living receipt, stamped, "Your inbreeding has been successfully delivered." And outwardly, everything seemed royal enough, portraits, titles, trains of silk. But behind the brocades and coats of arms was a tragicomedy of pure blood. A story where not even a crown could protect from the deformities planted generations earlier and signed, sealed, and delivered under the royal name. Maria de Medici. The Madonna with a genetic time bomb? Ah, the Medici. The very family that bankrolled the Renaissance, kept popes in their pocket, and sprinkled gold dust over the arts. But behind the velvet curtain of cultural brilliance lurked a dynasty so obsessed with marrying their own that they turned themselves into a walking genetic cocktail with a bitter aftertaste. Exhibit A, Maria de Medici, who lived from 1575 to 1642. Born to the Tuscan branch of the Medici, Marie was descended from a line that believed a good match meant someone with the exact same amount of Medici blood as you. Cousins, uncles, nieces, if it kept the money and power in the family, it was practically romantic. And yes, as always, the bill came due. On her face, when Marie arrived at the French court to become queen, the courtly whispers weren't exactly flattering. Heavy features, massive jaw, manly angularity, those were the royal compliments. Stylists worked overtime trying to soften the face that screamed inbred Florence louder than any royal trumpet. But looks weren't the worst of it. Episodes of psychosis, fits of terror, uncontrollable rages, all of it was blamed on her bloodline. Court doctors muttered about familial blood congestion, while her enemies said it outright: she was born to be a problem. Maria de Medici wasn't just the mother of Louis XIII. She was living proof that you can descend from bankers, popes, and geniuses and still be held hostage by your own DNA. Because not even a royal crown can hide a hereditary jawline, or the fits that arrive right on schedule, passed down like fine china. Maria Francisca of Savoy, the princess saved by neither blood nor lace. In the House of Savoy, they cherished three things: power, expensive fabrics, and marrying their own. The latter they pursued with such zeal that, at some point, their family tree began to resemble a tangle of ivy twisting endlessly, with not a single fresh branch. And the result? Maria Francisca of Savoy. She lived from 1646 to 1683 and seemed to suffer from everything one could inherit through the deluxe inbreeding package. Her portraits rarely appear in schoolbooks, and for good reason. Deformed ears, a visibly asymmetrical face, a strange tilt of the head as if she were always trying to hear something. Courtiers, with characteristic delicacy, described her as awkward, meaning she often fell, moved stiffly, and wore a perpetually unfocused gaze. Today, doctors might speak of central nervous system disorders. Back then, people just looked away and raised their fans. Her life was like a ball without music. She married the King of Portugal, not for love, of course. It was a union between two royal lines, exhausted by their own reflections. And what did Portugal get? A queen who was often ill, rarely smiled, and always seemed to be bracing for a fall, sometimes literally. Maria Francisca was not just another infanta in lace. She's a living reminder that if you spend generations breeding only within the family, one day you'll end up with a princess whom neither the mirror flatters nor the throne supports. Power may be glamorous, but genetics doesn't care about your coat of arms. It just hands you the bill. Caroline of Bavaria, the queen with a face you don't argue with. Caroline of Bavaria, who lived from 1792 to 1873, was a woman whose face entered the room before she did and stayed in people's memory long after. Judging by portraits, and even more by court whispers, she looked as if Jupiter himself had laid claim to the throne only in a dress. Born in Bavaria, Caroline became Queen of Württemberg. But if anyone thought marriage to a king meant ballet, lace, and longing glances, they were sorely mistaken. Her wedding resembled less a romantic union and more the collision of two dynastic tractors. Both she and her husband were products of so many familial crossovers that any modern geneticist would develop a migraine by the third generation. Caroline had a face that could easily be mistaken for a Roman warrior's bas-relief, elongated with a heavy jaw and pronounced cheekbones. Signs of acromegaly. Her contemporaries didn't know the word, but they knew that feminine beauty usually implied something else. The court whispered about her masculine features, and court painters, cursing fate, struggled to give that jaw even a hint of charm. They failed. But it wasn't just her face that drew attention. Her hands, long, broad, with thick fingers, looked like they'd been borrowed from a master blacksmith. Gloves had to be custom made, and jewelry, only the heaviest pieces would do anything light or risk getting lost. None of this was nature's whim. It was the predictable result of a family line where blood ties weren't an obstacle to marriage, but practically a recommendation. That's why Caroline's children inherited not so much titles as generational fatigue. Caroline of Bavaria was no mistake of history. She was its honest, documentary reminder. When you stir the same handful of surnames in a sealed noble pot for centuries, the outcome might be anything except an ideal. Cleopatra v. Tryphena, the face of Egypt, assembled from genetic fragments. If you think that Cleopatra's story is all glamour, seduction of Caesar and Mark Antony, then we hasten to dispel your illusions. Today, we're talking about Cleopatra VI Tryphena, the sister of the more famous Cleopatra VII, who got lost in the annals of history. Or, to be more precise, a genetic trap that hatched from the most ruthless marriages in history, the Ptolemies. Descendants of the Macedonians, the Ptolemies ruled Egypt not only with a rod but also with chromosomes. For centuries, they married exclusively their sisters. Why? To preserve the purity of blood. If by purity you mean progressive degeneration, Cleopatra VI was just such a flower grown on the soil of stubborn inbreeding. Her fate is like that of shadows in a basement. Almost no records or sculptures remain, only fragments, rumors, and whispers from papyri. But something has survived. Mentions of strange features, a sloping forehead, a broken nose line, a narrow jaw, a lack of harmony in the face. No sculptor was in a hurry to immortalize such a queen in marble. Apparently, even Egyptian propaganda knew the limits of aesthetics. All this is a direct result of the inbreeding roulette that the Ptolemies played for centuries. Her reign is vague. Her portrait is a hypothesis, but one thing is clear. Cleopatra VI is not a femme fatale from Hollywood movies. She is the embodiment of the consequences when dynasties confuse the throne with a bottomless pit, when power becomes more important than health. And then they are surprised that even a pharaoh cannot survive without a surgeon and psychiatrist priest. A queen? Yes. But with a face that history preferred to forget? Infanta Antonia of Spain, a dynastic face that no fan or crown could hide. Usually when people speak of 19th century princesses, there's a whiff of nostalgia. Lace, crystal, ballet slippers, and Madrid fanfares. But for Infanta Antonia of Spain, things didn't exactly unfold like a watercolor painting. She was born in 1845 right into a genetic minefield carefully laid out by her grandfather, Ferdinand VII. He, in turn, never missed a chance to marry into his own reflection, a royal family tree that looked more like a wreath. Infanta Antonia was the product of this mirror-like lineage. Her face in the few surviving photographs practically screams, "I am the dynasty." So elongated, with such a protruding jaw, that even Victorian retouchers couldn't soften the blow. Her strabismus added a layer of tragic drama. She looked like a Renaissance portrait filtered through a satire. Whispers followed her throughout her life. Childhood difficulties, they said a genteel euphemism, for rumors of developmental delays, an odd gait, and a gaze that seemed to look through people rather than at them. But who would speak this aloud when you're dealing not just with a royal, but with a living monument to Spain's noble pride, a pride crafted from the same set of surnames reshuffled for generations? The irony? Like many heirs of these inbred dynasties, Antonia became more a symbol of decay than of glory. A heraldic lion, perhaps only with one wandering eye, and a jawline strong enough to support a minor cathedral. Her life isn't just a biography, it's a diagnosis. An emblem of an era that prized pure bloodlines over healthy heirs and paid dearly for it, one disfigured descendant at a time.